That's the thoughts of one Crystal Palace fan. Let's speak to Ian Noble from the Blue and White Review podcast. Morning, Ian.
I hope you meant Red and Blue Review podcast. Good morning.
Yes, Red and Blue. Where did that?
QPR,
Sorry, I've written
QPR angle.
Where has that come from? Red and Blue Review. Exactly. Well corrected. Thank you very much. You weren't at the protest yesterday because you couldn't make it. Can you explain to us why so many Palace fans were?
Yeah, absolutely, because Crystal Palace fans collectively feel there's a massive injustice here, that we have been demoted from the Europa League to the Europa Conference League. Look, we won our place in the Europa League fair and square, as everyone has already highlighted. It brought a smile to my face listening to that commentary back 2 months ago from Wembley, which was the most fantastic Crystal Palace day of all time. For all fans, as I know, no one said, I can top that moment. It was brilliant. We beat one of the best sides, or most richest sides in the world on the day. We beat a very good Aston Villa team in the semi-final, and we deserved our place in the Europa League. So to have it taken away like this is a real sense of injustice. And Palace fans have never sat back quietly in the background. You have to go back to, of course, 2010 and the administration and the protests outside of Lloyd's head office in London when they made their voices heard then. And they did the same again last night, marching from Norwood Junction to Selhurst Park in protest with banners, chanting. Some of it we can't repeat on the radio, but it was a collective group. About 500 fans turned up last night, and as far as I can see, it was all in very good spirits, and they made their point known very clearly.
What do we expect to be the outcome of this? Because the season's hurtling towards us. I mean, UEFA will do what UEFA want as well. They don't care, with the greatest respect, about Crystal Palace.
Well, this is the thing, you see. I think the other Palace fan just said, if this had been another club, if this had been a bigger club, we can't see UEFA reacting in this way. Of course, we haven't got a European history. We'd love one. We'd love to start one. But we feel just we've been treated badly. It's the only season that this deadline of the 1st of March has been in place. Previously, it was the 1st of June. Now, 1st of June makes a lot more sense, of course, because you then know whether you've qualified for Europe or not, and you can get your act in order and make, reach out to UEFA and say, look, we can't do this quite yet, but we will do it. Back on the 1st of March, we were in the bottom half of the Premier League in the last 16 of the FA Cup. We'd never won a major trophy. Nobody really thought we were going to qualify for Europe. That's not an excuse. It's just a fact. That's where we were. So we feel there's a real sense of injustice. Some Palace fans are saying, look, if it's not the Europa League, then stuff them. We don't want anything. But I think we will take the consolation prize if it's offered to us, and we'll give it a good go. I've heard other commentators say that, look, we've got a much better chance in the Europa Conference League. The standard of opposition is less. But look, we want to play in the Europa League. That's what everyone wants. And we hope that the protests at Selhurst, and I think another one is planned for the City on Friday, that people will take notice. And we're talking about it now, aren't we? The media are responding and taking notice. It was all over the BBC last night and again this morning. So thank you for your interest and coverage, guys.
Yeah, there is an appeal process going through. Do you sense positivity that will lead to something, that will lead to some kind of change, Ian?
Yeah, you'd like to think so, because if common sense prevails at all, then it's very clear there is no multi-club ownership issue here. We do not have a common director here between Crystal Palace and Lyon anymore. And even then, you go back in March, you could argue, and this is Parish's point, that John Textor never had controlling interest at Crystal Palace. He never did. And so therefore, if he didn't have controlling interest, then there can't be an absolute conflict of interest. But that's not the UEFA rules, rather. They see it as that. So the CAS have got to look at it slightly differently, and we hope that they do. And allow us back into the competition.
Ian, really appreciate your time this morning. Thank you so much for joining us.
No worries. Pleasure, guys.
Ian Noble, Palace fan and podcaster with us, 8:59 across.
Of arbitration for sport. Let's talk to Paul Gear, lifelong Crystal Palace fan and a regular contributor to the Red and Blue Review podcast. He's on the line now. Paul, hello.
Hi, Nick. Good evening.
What was it like then last night with these Palace fans out on the streets protesting? Was it anger? Was it disappointment? Was it frustration? Was it a combination of all three?
I think it is probably a combination of all three. I mean, there's a lot of disappointment. I mean, 2 months ago we had the greatest day of our lives as Crystal Palace fans, and nothing will take away from winning the FA Cup. But a nice side effect of doing that is qualifying for the Europa League. So to shortly after that sort of be having rumblings we wouldn't be able to play in the Europa League, it was disappointing, and it's dragged on obviously to the final decision that's now gone through. So Crystal Palace fans have basically taken to the street almost, because that's all we can do. There's not much else you can do. So there was a lot of people there last night, and it's a mixture. I think it's turning to anger slowly. I think people can see perhaps a few inconsistencies as bigger clubs that have qualified for Europe in the past and not quite had these problems, and the perception is they would probably be a bit more lenient with them or work with them a bit more, and Crystal Palace seems to be made an example of. So yeah, the fans, it's their first step. I think there's a few more things planned with a few other places and people, but yeah, whether it will get to UEFA's door and they'll take notice, we'll never know. But yes, it'll be interesting to see. We apparently are appealing. That's been announced today. So yeah, that's the next step, really.
What are people saying when they're there? Do they think that the Crystal Palace fans kind of making a stink about this and perhaps pointing out what some people would see as inconsistencies in the way that UEFA deals with football clubs of various shapes and sizes will actually alter what has happened, or is that change really going to come from lawyering up and using the various levers that are available to Steve Parish?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to know. I think genuinely most Palace fans probably think, yes, marching on the street is good to raise the cause, it's good to get publicity. So we've been talking a lot on the radio, as we are now. And the more people that we can get on board, the more chance perhaps someone will take notice. I know the FA have written on our behalf to the UEFA to see if that will help. Ultimately, yes, lots of hundreds of Crystal Palace fans marching probably won't have much effect on it. I know. Obviously, it's a rule in place, and you can question the rule, you can question the deadline. But ultimately, we didn't think we were not adhering to this rule, because it's all about, as we said earlier, ownership from certain parties. The party in question that owned most of us had no say in running us. Now, Steve Parish has today come out and said they have unequivocal proof of that. Which they've obviously presented to the UEFA board, but that's obviously not been taken. So we're obviously going to take that to CAS and see if they have a different view on it. But yeah, I think the lawyers are going to have probably more chance of getting this overturned than the fans.
It's interesting that a lot of Crystal Palace fans do not seem to blame the club or the people that run the club at all, actually. I mean, the kind of the facts are relatively well known. It's a bit confusing, but this idea that Crystal Palace should have declared the John Textor shares before March, or because at that point they didn't know they were going to win the FA Cup, and so there's kind of bits of rationale all over the place. But I don't get the sense, and correct me if I'm wrong, the Crystal Palace fans are sort of saying, "Oh well, why didn't you just send the facts?" And all that kind of stuff. Do you see what I mean by that?
Yeah, no, completely. I think you're right there. It's I think most of the focus is on UEFA at the moment. Obviously, the club have admitted on maybe missing communications, and they clearly have missed a deadline. I think from our point of view is, again, we were asked to adhere to a rule on March the 1st that really was of no need to us. We weren't in Europe. We're in the bottom half of the table. It probably wouldn't have affected us. And so probably didn't think we needed to do anything. Now, in hindsight, obviously, yes, we saw an email. There was an email from the FA last October. There were emails from UEFA at the start of the year. Someone probably should have picked that up, rung UEFA and said, look, this is our situation. Are we going to have a problem? That didn't happen. So we are where we are. And we think UEFA really, it's sort of coming out. There's other clubs who haven't hit the deadline either that are still trying to negotiate their way through this. And they seem to be getting an extension, whether that's because they engaged in a process earlier, who knows. But it does seem that Crystal Palace are being sort of stuck rigidly to a deadline, which, okay, rules are rules, but that rule it's very questionable whether it should even apply to us, because many people for many years have known John Textor has no influence at Crystal Palace. He's said that many times. Yes. He's been trying to sell for 2 years because he has no influence at Crystal Palace. So really, if they received an email saying you're going to have a problem because John Textor is part running of your club, they probably would have thought, well, he isn't, and we're not probably going to have to prove this because we're not going to be in Europe. And yeah, so it's a bit of a mix-up on all sides. As you say, in hindsight, yes, things could have been taken, steps could have been taken, but yeah, it also shows a bit of the ludicrousness of the deadline, because football clubs don't have crystal balls, and Crystal Palace in over 100 years of history have never qualified for Europe. We've never won a trophy. So realistically, the thought of that happening was not probably on the forefront of their mind, and that this would need to be done. So really, the deadline should be, as it always has been, in June at the end of the season, so clubs will know where they stand, what they've qualified for, and whether they need to resolve anything.
Paul, you are still in the Europa Conference League, and I know that any football club that qualifies for Europe for the first time would, about this time of year, be starting to look at any potential draw and who you might get, and planning trips possibly or not, as the case may be. Do you think that while this process goes on and Palace are entered into the Europa Conference League, very unfortunate slip of the tongue, that you'll still be able to enjoy that? Because I felt when Palace won the FA Cup that, that idea of having these European adventures would just be such a wonderful new experience for Palace supporters. Can you still relish that, do you think, even though the future is somewhat uncertain?
No, I don't think we can at the moment, to be honest. As you say, one of the offshoots of winning the Cup was the thought of going to some really big, high-profile grounds around Europe and playing some really good games. While we don't know what conference or league we're in, it's really hard to sort of prepare your mind for what we're going to be up for. You don't know what teams are going to be involved. You don't know what countries you're going to be travelling to. So at the moment, it's very hard for any Palace fan to sort of get any enthusiasm, to be honest, for it. Once the decision is made one way or another, then obviously people will have to make do with whatever decision is made, and then people will start looking at what's about, and probably, if it is the conference, people will probably start to enjoy the fact that it's our first time in Europe. It'll be a new experience. There'll be some new places to go. But certainly at the moment, while it's up in the air and you don't know what you're planning for, it's hard to sort of, get happy about it. Very fair.
Does this detract from the FA Cup victory at all of this business? A conversation you didn't want to have, a series of legal proceedings you didn't want to have to instigate. Does it dilute any of that? Because it was, so brilliant to see Palace win something for the first time. Has this harmed it at all?
No, I don't. I think the majority of the fans are still on a high. I mean, I speak to people, and people still get a lump in their throat when they hear the commentary or they see the goal on TV. Nothing will ever take away from Crystal Palace winning the FA Cup. It was the most amazing day. It was a great moment, and the way we did it, obviously beating Manchester City, who are a powerhouse of a football club. If anyone had said at the start of the season you're going to end up the season with the FA Cup trophy in your trophy cabinet, everyone would have been delighted. And as I say, nothing will ever take from that, luckily. I mean, this obviously has cast a little bit of shadow on what's going to happen after that, but no, everyone will, once this is all done, dusted, everyone will look back on the FA Cup as probably the greatest Crystal Palace day ever.
I think it probably was. This was going to be the most tremendous piece of icing on an already sumptuous cake, and that icing has kind of felt a little bit stale. But maybe that will change. I suppose that's the hope. That's why you guys were out there yesterday.
Exactly. As I say, we're going to go to the Court of Arbitration for Sport. We're going to present our case. Unfortunately for us, we're in a position where they have already looked at two teams that have also suffered this MCO problem, and they've upheld the UEFA ruling. So it's obviously got to take a lot of convincing, but that's what they're there for. They will review everything, and hopefully they'll see things in our way.
Good to talk to you, Paul. Thank you very much indeed, Paul.